I never imagined temptation would find me in the very place I thought I was safest. Work. My name is Daniel, and for the past 3 years, I've been living with Adrian, my partner, a man whose stability and kindness were what first drew me to him. Our relationship had settled into a quiet rhythm, shared dinners, movie nights, and the occasional weekend getaway. It wasn't unhappy, but there was a growing silence between us, the kind that creeps into a home unnoticed until it feels permanent. We loved each other, yes, but passion had dulled into routine. At the office, however, nothing felt routine. My boss, Marcus, had a presence that filled every corner of the room. Tall, immaculately dressed, with a confidence that made people turn when he spoke, he commanded authority effortlessly. Colleagues admired him, but for reasons I struggled to admit, I felt something sharper, an attraction that both unsettled and intrigued me. From the beginning, Marcus singled me out in ways I couldn't quite explain. During meetings, his eyes lingered on me when I presented. His comments about my work always carried a weight, as if he saw potential no one else did. Sharp thinking, Daniel, he'd say with that low, deliberate tone, and my chest would tighten, though I quickly disguised it with a nod. I tried not to think too much of it. After all, I was committed to Adrian. Yet late at night, when Adrian would drift to sleep beside me, my mind betrayed me, replaying those moments at the office. It wasn't just Marcus's looks. It was the way he seemed to read me, as if he knew the parts of myself I didn't speak aloud. Deadlines grew heavier as the company took on new clients, and it became normal for me to stay late. That's when Marcus and I began crossing paths outside the usual hum of the daytime office. The building would empty, the chatter of colleagues replaced by the muted sound of keyboards and the faint hum of fluorescent lights. I would catch him leaning over my desk, his cologne subtle but unmistakable, asking about progress. His words were professional, but his eyes, calm, steady, lingering, spoke something else. One evening, he stopped behind me as I worked on a presentation. "You're pushing yourself hard," he remarked. His hand brushed against the back of my chair as he leaned forward to look at the screen. The proximity was startling, his arm close enough that the warmth of his skin seemed to radiate through the thin fabric of my shirt. I swallowed, my mouth suddenly dry, but forced myself to keep typing, pretending I hadn't noticed. "Someone has to make sure this gets done," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Marcus chuckled softly, a sound that seemed far too intimate for the near-empty office. "That's what I admire about you, Daniel. You don't settle for less than your best." Admire. The word lodged itself in my chest. He straightened, but not before his hand brushed the back of my shoulder in what could have been a casual gesture, or something more. I couldn't decide, and that uncertainty consumed me. Later that night, as I drove home, Adrian called to ask if I wanted him to reheat dinner. His voice was warm, familiar, yet I felt distant, distracted by the ghost of Marcus's touch. I assured Adrian I was fine, though my thoughts were nowhere near home. The pattern continued, Marcus's compliments, his occasional questions about my life beyond work, the subtle ways he leaned closer than necessary. None of it crossed an explicit line, yet every interaction left me restless. Adrian noticed my distraction, of course. Over breakfast one morning, he asked if something at work was troubling me. I smiled, reassured him it was only the workload, and changed the subject. I hated lying, but the truth was harder to face. I was drawn to my boss in ways I couldn't control. The shift became undeniable one Friday evening. As colleagues packed up to leave, Marcus caught my eye from across the room. "Stay a little longer?" he asked casually, as though it were a simple request. His gaze lingered just long enough to suggest otherwise. My pulse quickened. I hesitated, thinking of Adrian waiting at home, perhaps setting the table for two. Yet my mouth formed the words before I could stop myself. "Of course." As the last of my coworkers filed out, I realized I had crossed an invisible threshold. The office doors closed, leaving only Marcus and me in the dim glow of desk lamps. And for the first time, I understood that what was about to happen could change everything. The office felt eerily still after everyone else had left, as though the silence itself had chosen to conspire with Marcus. The glow of the desk lamps cast long shadows across the room, and in that muted space, every sound seemed amplified: the soft click of his shoes against the floor, the rustle of papers, even the rhythm of my own breathing. Marcus removed his jacket and draped it across the back of a chair, rolling up his sleeves as if preparing for something more intimate than work. "We'll get this finished quicker if we focus together," he said, his voice even, but with an undertone that made my pulse thrum. I sat across from him, laptop open, trying to keep my eyes fixed on the slides I was editing, yet his presence pulled at me, like gravity, drawing me in despite every attempt to resist. He leaned closer at intervals, his shoulder brushing mine, his cologne weaving through the air in waves I couldn't ignore. For a while, we worked in silence, punctuated only by Marcus's occasional suggestions. But then the conversation shifted, almost imperceptibly, into something more personal. "Do you ever feel underappreciated?" he asked, his gaze fixed on the screen, though his tone hinted at something else. The question caught me off guard. "Sometimes, I guess. But that's part of the job, isn't it?" Marcus shook his head. "Not for someone like you. You give more than people realize." "I see it, Daniel." The way he said my name, slow, deliberate, sent a tremor through me. I forced myself to glance back at the laptop, yet the words on the screen blurred. I just do what's expected." "No," he replied, softer this time. "You do more, and I can't help but admire that." There was again, admire. The word felt heavier in this empty room, stripped of casual context. My chest tightened as I tried to process it, torn between flattery and fear. I thought of Adrian waiting at home, probably scrolling through his phone on the couch, expecting me any minute. My loyalty to him anchored me, but it was a fragile anchor against the pull of Marcus's steady gaze. The silence stretched until Marcus leaned back, his expression unreadable. Then, almost as though he were testing the air between us, he reached out and rested a hand lightly on my forearm. I froze, every muscle tensed, yet I didn't pull away. His touch was warm, deliberate, lingering longer than any professional boundary allowed. My breath caught, and in that suspended moment, the truth I had been denying crystallized. I wanted this. "Marcus." I began, though the word came out more like a plea than a protest. He studied me, his thumb brushing faintly against my sleeve. "You don't have to pretend with me," he said. "I can see in your eyes." The room seemed to shrink around us, the edges dissolving until all I could perceive was his hand on my arm and the heat building in my chest. My rational mind screamed to stop, to pull away, to remember Adrian. But another voice, quieter yet stronger, urged me to surrender, to let go of the restraint that had defined me for so long. Before I could decide, Marcus leaned in, closing the distance between us. His lips touched mine, tentative at first, a question rather than an answer. My heart raced, and for a split second I thought I might resist. But then something inside me fractured, and I kissed him back with a hunger I didn't know I possessed. The kiss deepened, slow and consuming, pulling me further into the spiral I had tried so hard to avoid. My hands trembled as they found his shoulders, and for a moment the world outside that office ceased to exist. When we finally parted, I drew in a ragged breath, shame flooding me as quickly as desire. "I shouldn't," I whispered, though my voice carried no conviction. Marcus's eyes searched mine, steady and unflinching. "Sometimes the things we shouldn't do are the ones that remind us we're alive," he said. The words settled into me like a dangerous seed, one I knew would take root, no matter how hard I tried to bury it. I looked away, my chest heaving, torn between two lives, the safe one waiting for me at home, and the intoxicating one unfolding in Marcus's presence. My decision had already been made in that kiss, though I refused to admit it. When the night finally ended, I packed my laptop in silence, unable to meet Marcus's eyes. Yet, as I walked out of the office, the taste of him still lingered, and I knew there would be no turning back. Morning light streamed through the blinds as I lay beside Adrian, listening to the soft rhythm of his breathing. He looked peaceful, unaware of the storm unraveling inside me. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, emails, reminders, another message from Marcus I dared not open. I turned the screen face down and slid out of bed, guilt pressing against my chest like a weight I couldn't dislodge. At breakfast, Adrian poured coffee into my mug, smiling as though nothing had shifted. "You were home late again," he remarked casually, stirring sugar into his cup. "Big project," I replied too quickly. The words tasted like ash. He nodded, accepting the excuse, but his eyes lingered on me for a moment longer than usual, searching. I forced a smile, kissed his cheek, and left before he could ask more. The drive to work was a blur of red lights and unanswered questions. My mind replayed the kiss, the touch, the whispered words I should never have heard. Every rational part of me screamed that it had been a mistake, a lapse in judgment. But beneath the guilt simmered something darker, more dangerous, desire. When I arrived, Marcus was already in his office, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened as though the night had never ended. He looked up, and for a fleeting second our eyes locked. No words passed between us, yet the silence carried more than language could. I turned away, quickly, pretending to busy myself with papers that didn't matter. Throughout the day, our interactions were minimal, professional on the surface, but beneath it all, a current pulsed, undeniable and relentless. A brief brush of his hand when passing me a file, a glance that lasted one beat too long. Small gestures that reignited what I was trying desperately to suppress. That evening, Adrian suggested dinner out. We sat across from each other at a small Italian restaurant, candlelight flickering between us. He talked about his week, about friends making plans for the weekend, about us. I nodded, responded where I could. But my mind was split, half with him, half trapped in the memory of Marcus's lips against mine. "You've seemed distant lately," Adrian said softly, his fork pausing midway. "Is it work? Or is it something else?" The question pierced me. I forced a laugh, shaking my head. "Just stress, that's all." He studied me, sadness flickering in his eyes before he looked down at his plate. In that moment, I hated myself, not only for betraying him, but for the lies I piled on top of the betrayal. Days bled into weeks, each one heavier than the last. I went through the motions at home, but inside I was unraveling. Every time Adrian reached for me, I stiffened. Every time he said, "I love you," I wondered what it would sound like if Marcus said the same. One night, as I packed my bag to leave the office, Marcus appeared in the doorway. "Stay a while," he said, simply. His tone was calm, but beneath it lay something unspoken, a promise I knew too well. "I can't," I murmured, though my feet betrayed me by not moving toward the door. He stepped closer, his gaze steady, almost challenging. "You can. You just don't want to admit why." My chest tightened, torn between the comfort of home and the fire of this dangerous pull. I thought of Adrian waiting, maybe wondering why I was late again. Yet, when Marcus's hand brushed mine, the decision I swore I wouldn't make rose unbidden. The office felt smaller this time, as though it were closing around us, forcing me into a choice I had already made in my heart. My breath caught, and without another word, I followed Marcus back inside. Later, when I finally walked through the door of my apartment, Adrian was asleep on the couch, a blanket pulled over his chest. I stood there in the dim light, watching him, guilt gnawing at me so fiercely it nearly broke me. I wanted to confess, to beg forgiveness, to undo what had been done. But the words stayed trapped in my throat, silenced by the memory of Marcus's touch still burning on my skin. I sank into a chair across the room, staring at Adrian's peaceful face. Two lives stretched before me. One safe but fading, the other reckless but intoxicating. I didn't know which path I would choose. All I knew was that whichever one I followed, someone would be lost. And as I sat there in the quiet, I realized the hardest part wasn't what had already happened. It was knowing that this was only the beginning. Sleep had become an enemy. Each night, I lay awake beside Adrian, staring at the ceiling, trapped between guilt and craving. His steady breathing, the warmth of his body next to mine, should have comforted me. Instead, it only sharpened the contrast between the life I had and the life I was drifting toward. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Marcus, his expression, his touch, the way he spoke my name like it was meant only for him. Adrian noticed, of course. "You're restless," he said one night, turning toward me in the dark. His hand brushed my chest, tentative, as if he feared the answer. "Is it me?" The question sliced through me. I caught his hand, pressed it to my lips, and whispered, "No, it's work. Just stress." The lie rolled off my tongue too easily, but the guilt that followed was crushing. He nodded, not fully convinced, but he didn't push. That hurt even more. At the office, Marcus remained composed, professional, as if nothing had changed. Yet every so often his eyes found mine across the conference table, and the air shifted. A silent reminder pulsed between us, what we had done, what we might do again. My stomach nodded each time, but my body betrayed me with anticipation. The tension escalated when Marcus called me into his office late one afternoon. Sunlight streamed through the glass windows, casting a golden hue that made the space feel warmer than it was. He gestured toward the chair opposite him, but when I sat down, he leaned forward, forearms on his desk, his gaze locked on mine. "You've been avoiding me," he said, not accusatory but certain. I swallowed hard. "I've been busy." His lips curved in a knowing half-smile. "Busy convincing yourself it didn't mean anything?" My silence was answer enough. Heat rose in my chest, part anger, part fear, part something I couldn't name. It was a mistake, I forced out. He studied me for a long moment before shaking his head. "If it were just a mistake, you wouldn't be here right now." The words lodged deep. I hated that he was right. My body leaned forward instinctively, betraying me once again. I wanted to deny it, to shut the door on whatever this was, but I couldn't. Not when every nerve in me seemed wired to him. That evening, I returned home to find Adrian cooking dinner, the scent of garlic and rosemary filling the air. He looked up with a smile that tightened my throat. "I thought we could eat in tonight," he said. I forced myself to join him, to sit at the table we had shared so many nights before. He poured wine, asked about my day, laughed at his own clumsy attempts to chop vegetables. I smiled where I could, but guilt churned in me like acid. When he reached across the table and squeezed my hand, I nearly broke. His faith in me was intact, unshaken, and I was betraying it with every breath I took. Later, when he leaned in to kiss me goodnight, I froze. He pulled back slightly, hurt flickering in his eyes. "You don't want me anymore, do you?" he whispered. The words stabbed deeper than any confrontation Marcus could deliver. "That's not it," I insisted, though my voice cracked. "I'm just tired." Adrian nodded slowly, but the silence between us grew heavier than any argument. The next day, Marcus appeared at my desk just as I was preparing to leave. He rested a hand on the back of my chair, leaning close enough that his breath grazed my ear. "Stay tonight," he murmured. I turned to him, heart hammering. "I can't keep doing this," I said, though the tremor in my voice betrayed the truth. "Yes, you can," he countered, his eyes steady, unrelenting. "Because you want to." The world seemed to narrow, the noise of the office fading until there was only him, his hand, his words. My body leaned back into the chair, torn apart by two opposing forces, the loyalty I owed Adrian and the undeniable hunger that Marcus ignited. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Instead, I gathered my things and walked past him, every step a battle. But as I reached the door, his voice followed me, low and certain. "You'll be back." And I knew, with a sinking heart, that he was right.